Hello, hope you're doing well. So today's video is something a little different. It's a speed paint that I've wanted to make for the longest time, and it actually ended up being the biggest piece I've ever worked on, so I'm very excited to be able to finally share it on here. First things first though, it does call for a bit of context. So it's certainly no secret by this point that I am a major fan of Dungeons & Dragons. I've done a bunch of fan art in the past for the Adventure Zone and Critical Role, and I don't doubt that I'll be making plenty more art for those series in the future as well. But one D&D campaign that I haven't made a proper piece of art for yet is High Hopes, Low Rolls. Now, if you've never heard of High Hopes before now, that'd be because it's not actually a podcast online or anything, it's just a homebrew campaign that myself and some friends play together. Recently though, I worked on a portrait of our whole party for our DM's birthday. And I did record the whole drawing process since I wanted to make a speed paint out of it anyway, but I also thought it'd be nice to do a voiceover that talked a little less about the painting process itself, and a little bit more about the characters and stories that feature in our campaign, since they all hold a real special place in my heart. Anyway, without further ado, let me introduce you to the wonderful weirdos of High Hopes, Low Rolls. So right off the bat, I should probably mention that our party is pretty huge by Dungeons & Dragons standards. There are about 9 or 10 of us who play, and a lot of us have played multiple characters over the course of the campaign. This particular portrait features the characters people were using at the beginning of the arc we're playing through at the moment. So the first character to draw was Brio the Bard. Well, I say the Bard. After I was halfway done with this portrait, another of our friends joined the party as a jolly high elf bard who tackles problems very differently to Brio here. But that's a story for another time. Our party first met Brio in a tavern when we walked in to find her insulting the barkeep. She then turned around and introduced herself to us as being particularly good at sonnets, serenades, and stabbings. You might have also noticed that Brio here is a goblin. If any of you guys watch Critical Role, you might think that she was inspired by Not the Brave, but the funny thing is that my mate who plays Brio doesn't actually watch Critical Role. He's just a real advocate for goblin rights. Brio is a really fun character, but one of her highlight moments for me has probably got to be the time she cast Animate Object on some pillows, brought them to life, and used them to knock a grizzly bear into a trapdoor. I always feel like with Brio I draw her a lot cuter than maybe she was originally intended. One of the character features about Brio that I really like is her notepad and quill. She's always jotting down like little snippets of things that she can use in songs and stuff, so they're a really fun feature to be able to add into this character portrait. So for the actual painting in this portrait, I tried to keep it pretty simple. I applied all of my flat colours on one layer per character, going section by section. So like once I painted in the skin tone, I would lock that so I could add a bit of gradient, and then I'd go into the next part, like the hair or something. And then to apply the shading and tone, I would use the luminosity layer above those flats, as well as a multiply layer, and I'd use the same shade of purple on both of those to apply the highlights and the shadows where I needed them. Ava is the party's resident druid. She's a dwarf with flowers in her hair and alcohol in all of her potion bottles. I don't actually know how Ava joined High Hopes since she's been around since before I started playing, but I do know that she's the absolute life of the party. And I mean that in both the sense that she knows healing magic so that her fellow party members don't die, and that she's just lively as all hell if you give her some whiskey. Combat in any D&D campaign can be very scary, but if we're ever in a tricky situation, we know we can always count on Ava to flip our enemies a drunken bird and cast Moonbeam on them to stop them in their tracks. Recently, Ava has been documenting the adventures of High Hopes in the form of a smutty novel with a different innuendo as the title of every chapter. She also died once, but she got better. A lot of the poses in this portrait were actually lifted straight from a sketchbook I have that I sort of just use for D&D things. It was definitely fun to be able to revisit this particular pose for Ava because I think it really captures her sort of party animal kind of nature. One thing that I used quite a bit during this painting was rim light, which is basically a thing that you can do when you're doing the lighting for a character, where you put a sort of edge around the whole border of their body, or at least the edges that are facing your light source. I'm not entirely clear on the theory behind it, I'm sure there is some sort of artistic theory there, but for the most part it just made everything pop a lot more in this picture, so I was quite happy with that. Next up is Terra. Terra is a recent addition to the party who we met after arriving in a desert nation to follow up on a quest. She's an Earth Genasi, half tiefling, half genie, and honestly, she's just an absolute sweetheart. Terra isn't the most experienced fighter, to say the least. If anything, I think she's more of a pacifist, which makes her reactions in combat pretty entertaining. She does have a lot of really cool skills, but I think so far it's mostly been a case of her poking her head out from behind a rock, throwing out an Eldritch Blast, and hoping for the best. But hey, if it works, it works. She's also really fun to draw because of her hairstyle and the sort of glowing magma cracks on her skin. When her player was first describing her design when she joined the party, I was so excited thinking of how to draw her, and I had so much fun painting her properly in this portrait. I had a lot of fun drawing Terra's outfit. Something about the sort of shapes that it's comprised of make it really satisfying to draw. I also had a lot of fun with the colours. It was really nice to work in such an earthy palette and really bring out those warm tones. One thing to note when you're colouring a character whose palette is mostly just the one colour, like Terra here, most of her palette is brown. Even if it is the same colour, you do still want to be able to differentiate, so explore different tones, maybe bring a bit of it into yellow, a bit of it into red. Have fun with it, but just make sure you're not colouring it all in the same exact tone. For the magma lines on Terra's face, I used a variety of luminosity and lumi and shade kind of modes. A lot of people ask in the comments, but I use Paint Tool Sci for my drawing, so these are modes that you might not find in Photoshop, but if you are using a different program, I'm sure there are alternative sort of layer modes that you can use for it. Zeta is the party's cleric, or was the party's cleric. Last we saw of her, she got sucked into a bag and transported to another dimension. But, we're working on finding her. Somehow. High Hopes first met Zeta on the outskirts of a town we'd recently saved, where she blessed the grave of some player characters who hadn't made it through the fight. She comes from a small temple charged with protecting a gate to the elemental plane, and joined the party to help them out, travelling alongside them on her way to check up on the other elemental temples. find Zeta has always been a really interesting character because she's a cleric who, due to her deity, whose name escapes me at the moment, believes that death is the ultimate noble sacrifice, so she doesn't actually know any spells that could bring players back from the dead if we die during a fight. It's a cool character choice for sure, but I don't know, it always bodes well when the cleric's catchphrase is, "Ooh, they're dead." Zeta is another character whose outfit I always really like drawing. Again, it's made of some really satisfying sort of shapes, and I really like the sort of combat skirt she has going on. Zeta is another character who I gave quite a limited palette to as well, since she's sort of rooted in pale blue. So I tried to contrast that with a couple of earthy tones in the leather on her outfit, just to give it a bit of contrast. Fun fact as well, Zeta was raised by tieflings, which is why she has those horns in her hair. They were also really fun to colour because they're not like normal horns, they're made of metal, so it was fun to make them so shiny. To do the magic in Zeta's hand, I blocked it out in flat colour first, and then applied a couple of different layers of luminosity and Lumion shade, until it was at a brightness that I was happy with. Mina here is a monk who can dole out some seriously hard-hitting punches. She's also an air genasi. In contrast to Terra, however, Mina is half genie, half elf. But just like Terra, Mina is also a total sweetheart. Must be a genasi thing. Mina joined High Hopes at the same time as Zeta, since the two of them are best friends who are travelling from temple to temple together. She also has a real love for fresh air, fishing, and potatoes. One time, Mina got turned into a tiny snake by an enemy while she was levitating down a tunnel, and she fell 15 feet and died. Thankfully though, that turned her back into a person rather than killing her outright, so she used that newfound knowledge to help out the rest of our party members who had also been turned into tiny snakes, by picking them up and throwing them onto the ground head first. Again, if it works, it works. Mina is a really chilled out character, and she's also really relaxing to draw. I think it's mostly down to her hair, since it's so long you can do a lot of wavy shapes with it. And since she's a monk, I always find myself drawing her in these really sort of elegant but strong poses that are just really fun to work on. Another thing that was fun about doing this portrait was exploring everybody's colour palettes. Previously, I've only drawn most of these characters in black and white or just done like pencil drawings of them. So especially in a composition like this, where they're all packed quite closely together, it was fun to explore everybody's different sort of colour palettes and make sure that they were all differentiated clearly from each other. Nagoz is a dragonborn barbarian who wants to become a paladin, and is actually one of the original members of High Hopes. Remember what I said earlier about our party having a lot of character swaps? Yeah, this guy's been around for a while. He's not the brightest crayon in the box, but Nagoz certainly got a big heart. Each time one of the old members of High Hopes died, he got a tattoo to remember them by. I really like the little details of character development like that happen during the campaign. In combat, Nagoz's main plan of action is to get his rage on and rush into the fray, which, since he has more than enough hit points to spare, works pretty well most of the time. but not so much when the bad guys use psychic abilities to throw him off course. Again, not the brightest crayon in the box. I always find Dragonborn really hard to draw, but I think Nagoz is one of my favourites to work on out of any of the Dragonborn characters that are featured in our campaign, since he's pretty expressive. He also has a really simple outfit, which I can certainly appreciate. So as I said, I always find Dragonborn pretty difficult to draw, but I actually had a lot of fun while I was colouring Nagoz here. To get the scale texture on his skin, I did the same thing as I'd done with the previous characters and done a couple of gradients on top of the flat colour, but then I went back with some different textured brushes and put in some speckles, and I think it ended up looking pretty good. I didn't go too hard on the texture because he is a white Dragonborn and I didn't want him ending up too dark, so I tried to find some kind of happy middle ground. And just like with Zeta, I tried to contrast all of those pale tones with a couple of warm browns on his outfit. I also found that going back and doing that scale texture thing again with the highlight layer worked pretty well in bringing out some of the lighter tones. Ginga is a hill dwarf who boasts skills as both a fighter and a barbarian, as well as being another of the OG High Hopes party members. Like Nagoz, she has no problem rushing into battle head-on since she's a pretty hardy character. Quite soon after I started playing in the campaign, we had an arc that focused on protecting Ginga's hometown from destruction, and it was really cool to see how that affected her motivations and decision making. One of the most epic scenes I can remember was when we were chasing down an enemy who was trying to make an escape, and Ginga ended up commanding all of her town's archers to open fire on them, while the rest of us were also in the middle of the battlefield. Long story short, we spent each round of combat dodging about 500 arrows raining from the sky while we were trying to keep up with this runaway villain. None of us died, so I'd say that's a victory. I always have fun drawing Ginga because she's just so expressive, she's an absolute madwoman, but it's always a bit of a challenge because of how much armor she wears. I do think I need some more practice drawing armor, so Ginga's definitely a fun one to go back to whenever I need to give that a try. Another thing that was really fun with this picture was drawing everybody like in relation to each other, because we have so many different races in our party. We've got Dragonborns, Genasi, Dwarves, so getting that different scale of the characters next to each other was really interesting to see. Now, if any of you follow my Instagram, you'll probably already be familiar with this character since I can't stop drawing him for the life of me. This is Patti, and he's the character I play as. Patti is a wood elf rogue with an Irish accent who specialises as an arcane trickster, which basically means he's sneaky and magic. Patti first met High Hopes while delivering a letter to them in Ginga's hometown. After hearing that the town was in peril, he stuck around to help keep it safe, and has pretty much stuck with the party ever since to carry on doing good. Patti is a super fun character to play as since he basically just loves using his magic to prank people and have a laugh, but he can also put it to pretty good use in more tactical ways if he needs to. He's also a gay disaster, but thankfully I put all of his roguish expertise points into his charisma-based abilities, so he can bluff his way out of most of the potentially awkward situations he finds himself in. I ended up spending the most time on Patti's line work out of any of the characters because I gave him such an overcomplicated costume, but I love it and I didn't want to skip out any of the details. I think this is one of the first times I've been able to actually draw his cape the way I imagined it. In other drawings I'd done, it looked kind of like it was covered in feathers or fur or something, but it is actually supposed to be made of like autumn leaves, and I was super happy to finally have gotten that right for this picture. Patti's colour scheme as well is pretty autumnal, a lot of browns and oranges, but a couple of lighter tones in there as well to try and bring it out. Again, because his costume was so detailed, applying the flat colours also took a while because I had to make sure I didn't miss anything, but I do always find that it's fun to see more detailed costume designs come together like this. In contrast to his more complicated design though, I did try to keep his weapons, like his sword and stuff, a bit more simple, just to give them a bit more contrast and make them stand out more against the more detailed figure behind them. Mellark is the party's other rogue, who specialises less in mischief and more in murder. He comes from a secret guild of assassins. We actually met him after he was hired to kill Patti. Needless to say, he didn't finish the job and ended up abandoning the Assassin's Guild to join High Hopes. Though he started off as a bit frosty when we first met him, I think it's safe to say that he's starting to warm up to everyone. It's been really cool to see how his character has developed to grow into a real part of the team since he joined the campaign. Oh, and did I mention he's a werebear? We only found out that fact when we were on a boat in the middle of the ocean. It was a pretty eventful full moon to say the least, but thankfully the ship's captain wasn't mad about all the property damage. I ended up having to resketch Mellark's pose about 3 times because I wasn't happy with where his other arm was sitting, but I think it ended up in a decent place that flows with the rest of the pose. Mellark was another character whose palette was quite limited, so again I tried to bring out different tones of blue to make the different sections of his outfit stand out against each other. When doing the shading on a character, one thing that can give them real depth is to entirely, or at least mostly, shade the areas of their body that are in the background, so where a leg is further back or an arm is behind a body. If you leave them light, it'll make it look like they're in the foreground, but if you shade them properly, it'll give them that depth that you're looking for. It seems like it'd be something obvious, but I remember when I started out drawing, I used to only shade like the edges of all the body parts, no matter where they were positioned, like far away from the camera and stuff. So you know, if you learn to go a bit more all out with your shading, it tends to do you favors. I mentioned as much before, but for my shading and highlights, I tend to do them both in the same colour. The reason for this is so that they mesh well together, because for example, if you did all of the highlights in bright pink and then did all of the shading in dark green, sometimes that can work, it depends on what you're drawing, but I find that with my style anyway, it is a lot easier to integrate all the shadows and highlights together if they're just the same tone on different blending modes. So for the dice in the background, I will admit I did just sort of copy and paste a picture of some dice from Google Images that I found, and then I put them into the picture painted on top of them. It actually gave me a better understanding as well of how the light and shadows would have been cast in dice like these, so it is a technique that I would recommend if you're learning how to paint, because certainly from doing this I have a much better understanding of how I would do it next time if I didn't have a reference to draw on top of, but if I was just winging it, it wouldn't have looked anywhere near as good as this. And last but certainly not least, no D&D campaign would be complete without its Dungeon Master. She would never say so herself, but our DM is the most amazing storyteller I think I've ever met. All of the characters she creates for our campaign are so engaging, and she can switch between them at the drop of a hat. The story that we play through is pretty much entirely homebrew as well, and she puts so much heart into weaving all of our characters' stories together and creating new trials for them to face. So, to our DM, thank you for bringing the world of High Hopes to life. None of us could have been a part of this adventure without you. Like I said at the start of this video, this is a piece I've wanted to create for the longest time, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. I've made so many amazing friends through playing D&D, I don't think I can really put into words how much of an immersive experience it is every time we play a session, and it means the absolute world to be a part of this whole sort of in-game universe that we get to build together. I have so much love for these characters and the people who play them, and I can only hope that this picture sort of gets that across. Anyway, to anybody watching this, I hope you enjoyed hearing about our party. I certainly had fun talking about them, and do let me know in the comments if anybody stood out as your favourite. That'd be really interesting to hear. If you want to see more of High Hopes Low Rolls, I tend to post doodles from our sessions on my Instagram every now and then, as does my good buddy Amy from Binwitch Illustration, who plays Ginga. I actually based a bunch of the designs in this portrait off of her drawings of the party, so I'm going to leave a link to her Instagram in the description alongside mine if you want to check those out. If any of you guys would be interested in more sort of chatty videos like this as well, or just any more artwork of High Hopes in general, then let me know in the comments, because I really enjoyed making this one. For now though, thank you very much for tuning in, and I will hopefully see you next time.